Okay, Walter Wofford back. Today we're going to talk about inherited Roth IRAs, and it's some very important information. So if you inherit a Roth IRA from someone who passed off, you don't have to wait until you're 59 and a half to take out a qualified distribution, meaning tax-free from a Roth. It happens, that rule goes away, and so that's the reason my grandbabies all had inherited Roths at a young age, because you don't have to have earned income and you don't have to be a certain age to wait until you can use it. Okay, so with the help of my AI team, Bill and Judy, I put this together for you.
So if you'd like a copy of my ebook entitled Profit Powered Hostings, How to Run a Short-Term Rental Business Using RelayFi, just pull out your camera and put it up to the QR code and enter your information, and you'll immediately receive the ebook. All right, thank you.
Inheriting money, it sounds fantastic, right? I mean, especially a retirement account someone worked hard for.
Absolutely. It seems like a windfall.
But what looks straightforward can actually be, well, surprisingly complex, and the rules, they've changed a lot recently.
That's exactly right. These retirement accounts, they're great for the owner, but for the person inheriting, it's a whole different ballgame. Lots of rules, sometimes really strict ones. You really need to understand them.
And that's what we're doing today, really digging deep into this world of inherited IRAs, sometimes called beneficiary IRAs. We've got these notes, source materials, including some details from Walter Wofford, covering the definitions, the features, and yeah, the big impact of the Secure Act.
Yeah, our goal here is really just to help you navigate it all.
Yeah.
Based strictly on these sources we have, we want to make clear, how the rules differ depending on who inherits what this crucial 10-year rule is all about.
And who doesn't have to follow it.
Exactly. Who the exceptions are, the tax side of things, and why planning is just so important. And like you said, we're sticking only to the information in these provided sources today.
So get ready, because that old idea, the stretch IRA, where heirs could spread out taking the money over their whole lives, well, for most people inheriting now, that's pretty much gone. But the sources do detail some specific exceptions, people who still can stretch.
Right. And there was even that note, you mentioned it, about potentially using inherited Roths for something called tax-free EAT money connected to short-term rentals.
Yeah, we'll touch on that purely as an example from the source material showing how these tax rules might be used strategically. Not advice, just an illustration from the notes.
Okay, so first things first. According to this material, what exactly is an inherited IRA?
Well, at its simplest, the sources define it as basically a retirement account, could be an IRA, maybe a 401k, that gets opened up by someone after they inherit it because the original owner passed away.
And you mentioned it's also called a beneficiary IRA. The key thing the sources hammer home right away is the rules aren't the same for everyone. Not at all.
Right. They split significantly based on your relationship to the deceased. Specifically, spouse versus non-spouse. That's a huge fork in the road.
And also based on the account type, traditional Roth, maybe a 401k. All these factors matter.
That spouse versus non-spouse thing seems critical, though. The sources really highlight that spouses just get way more flexibility.
They really do. A spouse can often just roll the inherited money into their own IRA, treat it like it's theirs. Or they can keep it separate as an inherited IRA. More choices.
And there's a specific point about delaying distributions, right, for spouses.
Yeah, that's a key benefit noted. If the original owner died before they hit the age for required minimum distributions, or RMDs, usually 72 now, the surviving spouse can sometimes wait. They can delay taking RMDs from that inherited account until the deceased spouse would have turned 72.
Okay, that's helpful. But now, for any beneficiary, spouse or not, the sources mention something really interesting about getting the money out early. What about that standard 10% penalty?
Ah, yes. This is one of the most, fascinating points in the notes about inherited IRAs. That 10% early withdrawal penalty, the one that normally applies if you tap into your own retirement funds before age 59 and a half.
Yeah.
It does not apply here. Beneficiaries can take money out of an inherited IRA at any age without facing that penalty.
Wow. Okay. So the insight is you can potentially access this money penalty-free much sooner than your own retirement savings, no matter how old you are as the beneficiary.
Exactly. It's a really unique access point. But, and this is absolutely critical, remember taxes. Taxes might still be due, depending on the account type and when you take distributions. Penalty-free doesn't mean tax-free necessarily.
Right. Good point. And speaking of distributions and taxes, RMDs. The sources are very clear. The rules for taking required minimum distributions from these inherited accounts were significantly affected by the Secure Act. And the tax piece is huge.
Oh, absolutely huge. Generally, if you inherit a traditional IRA, the money you take out is treated as ordinary income. So yeah, it's taxable in the year you receive it.
Oh, yeah.
But if you inherit a Roth IRA, those distributions are usually tax-free. There's a condition, though. The original Roth account must have been open and funded for at least 5 years before you start taking money out.
Got it. 5-year rule for Roths. And the sources explicitly say the timing and the amount you withdraw have significant tax implications.
Definitely. Taking out a big lump sum, especially from a traditional IRA, could push you into a much higher tax bracket for that year compared to, say, taking smaller amounts over time.
Which brings us right to the big change everyone talks about. The Secure Act of 2019. The source material calls this out as having significantly changed the rules, especially hitting non-spouse beneficiaries.
That's the turning point. December 2019. This is where that old stretch IRA strategy, the one allowing a non-spouse beneficiary to take small distributions over their own entire lifetime, really maximizing that tax default.
Yeah, that attractive option.
It was largely eliminated, at least for accounts inherited from owners who died on or after January 1st, 2020.
So what replaced it for most non-spouse beneficiaries inheriting after that date?
In its place, we got the 10-year rule.
Okay, let's really focus here. The 10-year rule. What does it actually require?
According to the sources, it's a deadline. It mandates that the entire balance of the inherited IRA or employer plan has to be fully distributed, completely emptied out, by the end of the 10th year following the year the original owner died.
So if someone died in, say, 2021.
Then the account needs to be zeroed out by December 31st, 2031.
Okay. But here's something interesting I saw in the notes. Unlike the old RMD rules or even RMDs on your own accounts, this 10-year rule, it doesn't usually require specific minimum withdrawals each year within that decade.
That's the really crucial nuance, yes. And it's where the flexibility comes in within that hard deadline. The beneficiary generally has discretion over when they take the money out during those 10 years.
So you could take nothing for 9 years and then drain it in year 10. Or
Right.
take some each year, or all up front.
Pretty much. As long as that balance hits zero by the deadline, the how and when within the 10 years is largely up to the beneficiary.
But and this goes back to taxes. That flexibility on timing is directly tied to the tax impact we discussed. Taking it all in year 10, especially from a traditional IRA, could mean a massive tax bill that year.
Absolutely. That potential for a big tax hit, much sooner than under the old stretch rules, is precisely why the sources spend so much time detailing who is exempt from this standard 10-year rule.
Right, these exceptions. They're called eligible designated beneficiaries, or EDBs.
Correct. A very specific group defined by the Secure Act.
Okay, so who gets to be an EDB? Who avoids that 10-year clock? The sources list them out.
First group, no surprise, spouses. We already talked about their flexibility. They are EDBs. They can roll it over, treat it as their own, and potentially stretch distributions over their own lifetime.
Makes sense. Okay, who's next?
Next up, minor children of the account owner. Now, this is interesting. The sources say they can stretch distributions based on their own life expectancy.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Yes, a very important one here. The sources are clear. This lifetime stretch for a minor child only lasts until they reach the age of majority.
And what is the age of majority?
Well, the notes say it's typically 18, but it can vary by state or context. And it might extend up to age 26 if the child is still in a specified course of study, or potentially longer for certain disabilities.
Okay, so what happens when they hit that age?
Then the clock starts. The standard 10-year rule kicks in for whatever money is left in the account at that point. So it's not a lifelong stretch for them, it's temporary.
That's a really critical detail, a temporary stretch that becomes the 10-year rule. Okay, what other EDBs are there?
Disabled individuals. They also qualify as EDBs and can stretch distributions over their lifetime. The sources provide pretty specific criteria for this.
Like what?
Like being unable to engage in substantial gainful activity, SGA, because of a condition that's medically determinable and expected to last at least 12 months, or, sadly, result in death.
Okay, that sounds like it probably aligns with specific IRS definitions for tax purposes.
Yes, that seems consistent with the context.
Yeah.
Then there's chronically ill individuals. They also get the lifetime stretch.
And the definition for that.
Again, quite specific in the sources. It involves needing substantial help with at least 2 activities of daily living ADLs, or requiring substantial supervision due to a severe cognitive impairment. And this needs to be certified by a licensed healthcare practitioner.
Very defined criteria for both disability and chronic illness then, is that it?
One more category listed. Individuals not more than 10 years younger than the decedent.
Oh, interesting. So like a sibling who's close in age. Or maybe a friend.
Exactly. If the beneficiary isn't more than a decade younger than the person who died, they also qualify as an EDB and can use the lifetime stretch method for distributions.
Okay, so let's just summarize this EDB part based on the material. The big takeaway seems to be, unless you fall squarely into one of those 5 specific categories, spouse, qualifying minor child with that age trigger, qualifying disabled individual, qualifying chronically ill individual, or someone not more than 10 years younger,
Right.
then you, as a non-spouse beneficiary inheriting after 2019, you're likely subject to the standard 10-year rule. The clock is definitely ticking for you to empty that account.
Precisely. And understanding which set of rules applies to you has huge implications. It affects planning, how you manage the money, which is why the sources really stress the importance of, well, planning ahead.
Absolutely. The sources emphasize, for the original IRA owner, how crucial it is to actually name beneficiaries properly.
Yeah. Doing that helps ensure the money goes where you want it to go, and it can sometimes lead to better tax treatment for your heirs if you don't name anyone. Default rules kick in, could be the IRA agreement, could be state law, and that might not be what you intended at all.
And then for the beneficiary, the person receiving the account, the sources basically say, look, this is complex. It's been made more complex by recent laws like the Secure Act. You need to understand your specific situation.
For options, your obligations.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Which naturally leads to the recommendation we saw throughout the material. Beneficiaries really should talk to financial and tax advisors.
Definitely. Getting professional guidance seems almost essential, according to these sources, just to navigate the rules correctly and make smart choices.
And thinking about those choices, the material even gave that specific illustration we mentioned earlier. When talking taxes, those notes from Walter Wofford brought up using inherited Roth IRAs.
The potentially tax-free distributions after 5 years.
Right, and connecting that to strategies possibly involving short-term rentals, using the phrase tax-free, eat money.
Yeah, and it's important, as you said, this was presented in the source purely as an example of how the tax rules, especially the tax-free nature of Roth withdrawals after inheritance, could factor into certain financial strategies, just illustrating the kind of thinking these rules might enable.
Definitely underscores how understanding the tax side is just fundamental if you're going to strategize about using these inherited funds.
So really, whether you're someone saving in retirement accounts now, thinking about who gets what later, or maybe you think you might be a beneficiary someday, understanding these rules is pretty essential.
Yeah, it directly impacts how you plan, how inherited wealth gets managed, and, crucially, the tax consequences down the line.
So let's try to wrap this up. The bottom line from the sources seems to be inherited IRA rules. Definitely not one size fits all, highly specific.
And the Secure Act, a game changer. It brought in that 10-year rule for the vast majority of non-spouse beneficiaries inheriting accounts from owners passing away in 2020 or later.
But critically, there are those clearly defined exceptions. The eligible designated beneficiaries, or EDBs, spouses, certain minor children until they hit majority, qualifying disabled or chronically ill individuals, and people not more than 10 years younger than the decedent.
And the sources spell out detailed criteria for each of those EDB categories, determining if that lifetime stretch option is still on the table.
And because it is so complex, the need for professional financial and tax advice, that's a constant theme in the source material we reviewed, for owners planning and for beneficiaries figuring out what to do.
It really highlights how much the whole landscape of inheriting retirement money has shifted.
It really has. And this big shift, for most heirs going from potentially stretching money out over a lifetime to having to liquidate it within just 10 years. It leaves you, the listener, with a pretty interesting question to chew on.
How does this accelerated timeline fundamentally change the whole idea of retirement inheritance? Does it force heirs now to think differently? Maybe prioritize spending it sooner, investing it differently, or just viewing these funds in a completely new way compared to how things worked just a few years ago? Something to definitely think about.